Yeah, I was forced into a marriage at the age of 15 by my dad to a complete stranger who I had met that morning. It was for religious reasons and mainly to control my sexuality, and my whole life was taken from me. I was living with my mom at the time in Colorado, and I actually went to visit my dad for a summer visit, and my mom was expecting me to come back home. And instead, I was actually forced into a marriage with a man who was 13 years older than me. He was 28 and I was 15. And so I was spiritually married to him. He was able to leave the country with me later that week, with my dad's, probably a permission slip from my dad. And then 6 months later, we returned to the United States where, after, you know, what happens on a wedding night, basically. Yeah, I was, raped and impregnated and came back to the United States 6 months later, and I was legally married with basically just a permission slip from my father. And nobody really asked me if that was something that I wanted. I think at the time I probably was a little bit too traumatized to even be able to voice if I consented or not. But it was definitely a forced marriage. And where I was living at the time was in California, and that would have been a clear case of statutory rape. And so what that legal marriage allowed was a loophole through that statutory rape law, and it had allowed my abusers to get away with multiple crimes against me, including trafficking, kidnapping, sexual assault, assault of a minor, multiple abuses, and it basically was a get out of jail free card for them.
When you say get out of jail free card for them, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is that sex with a minor in general is illegal. But these marriage laws allow a loophole around those statutory rape laws, and the laws that are built to protect minors in these type of cases. The marriage laws actually allow a loophole for abusers to get around that. And then after, a minor is forced into a marriage, generally by a parent or guardian, there's really no legal recourse for them to be able to leave, because as a minor, you get treated like a minor, whether or not you're emancipated, by the judicial system, by the legal system, even by just law enforcement. Since 2017, I've been working on this issue, and I've worked with a lot of other survivors, and they all report the same types of abuses, unfortunately. And many of the minors who marry are girls marrying adult men in this country. Those are the facts.
Yeah, like when you're a minor, you have no rights. Is that how you felt at the time?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I think I was pretty numb to what was going on. I think when a minor suffers that type of abuse, it's really hard to overcome that trauma and be able to advocate for yourself in any, real type of way, because you're just in a situation where you're trying to survive, and that's really what I was trying to do. I was just trying to survive the situation.
And like, what do you want people to know about what you went through when you look back on that now?
Well, what I want people to know is that currently in the state of Washington and across the United States, there are 43 states that allow child marriage in some form. And what that allows is for adults to marry children. And when we're talking about minors who marry, we're generally talking about minors who are being forced into marriage, either by their guardians or by the people who are supposed to love and protect them. And oftentimes, children who are forced into marriage, there's other abuse occurring within that household. And it's a travesty that this is happening in today, 2023. Like, it shouldn't be happening anymore. And I always thought that my case was unique, or it was weird, or that I was weird and this just didn't happen. But as I did the research, I found that it was more prevalent than I had ever anticipated it being. And so that's really what drove me to start sharing my story, to make sure that this doesn't happen again to other minors. This shouldn't happen to minors, period.
Absolutely. I think that that's the thing is like when people, even the numbers show in the legislature that unanimous support. And yet, again, we're seeing this bill stall. This happened before and now it's
Yeah.
happening again. It's just not having any momentum.
Yeah.
But it had in zero opposition. So
Right.
why do you think that is?
I mean, I think that is because it is largely a women and girls issue, and women and girls issues tend to get looked over by legislators. And I think because we live in a very patriarchal society, where people believe that marriage should happen when there's a childbirth or when there's a pregnancy. Um, it is really it's really hard for people to understand that this is happening to minors, and it's happening in alarming rates, and it just shouldn't be happening at all. In my mind, there shouldn't be any minor being forced into a marriage with an adult. That is just wrong.
Right. Yeah, I think people think it's not happening in my family or my neighborhood or my whatever, and but like, really religious communities and stuff is one example where you do see it, right?
Right. And I think there's a big stigma around, that this issue does not happen here in the United States, that it happens in other countries. And that is one of the stigmas that we face all the time, when it comes to advocating for this issue, is that people think, well, no, it's their problem. It's another person's problem. It's not our problem. But it is our problem. It's been happening here in the United States since common law. And until we start addressing these laws, and start addressing the issue, it's not going to change. It's going to continue to happen. And unfortunately, those minors have nowhere to go. Um, once you're forced into a marriage, you can't go to a shelter. You can't access legal services in many cases. Even if you're an emancipated minor, it takes quite a bit of advocating to get those services. If you can imagine a minor walking into an attorney's office and saying, I want to file for a divorce, um, most attorneys aren't going to take your case. And most shelters will turn you away because you're under the age of 18. So you do not share the same rights as an adult. You can't enter into a lease. I didn't learn how to drive until I was 23.
Wow.
So that's just, all of your rights get taken away. Many minors who marry they're 3 times more likely to be abused within their marriage. And they're often pulled out of school, as that's the same what happened to me. And you're most likely to face emotional, physical, and sexual abuse during your marriage. And so escaping that situation would already be difficult enough as an adult. But if you can imagine a minor trying to face that, it's next to impossible.
Yeah, and
And
this
so,
again, this was not your choice. This was not something you wanted. You weren't ready. I mean,
right, I was
I mean,
15.
yeah, tell me, like, this was the circumstances of this was like it was someone you just met, right?
I met him that morning, and I was forced to marry him that night. So he was a complete stranger to me. He was an adult man. I never anticipated that part of my life. So it was extremely traumatizing.
Yeah, and in a
And
way, it's almost like sex trafficking.
it is, it's just another form of it. It's another form of sex trafficking. And they were able to, you know, take me out of the country, bring me back when I was pregnant, and then legally marry me. So um, some of those, trafficking me across the border and then bringing me back and then legally marrying me, that's a part of trafficking. That's part of sex trafficking.
You mind if I ask how you ended up getting out of the situation?
It took a long time, close to 10 years. I was 23 when I filed for divorce, and I had 2 children. And the way I was able to get away was just by fighting for my education. I was pulled out of high school as a freshman when I was, forced to marry. And so I started fighting to go back to school, and slowly, like I ended up getting my associate's degree in culinary arts. And as soon as I started working as a chef, like my first paycheck out, I went and filed for divorce.
You're an incredible woman. What an amazing story you have that you can stand here today and tell us that you got out of that. So wow. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for highlighting this. And I'm just one of hundreds of thousands of survivors across the United States. My story, unfortunately, is not unique. Um, and sadly, we all face the same types of abuse, and it just has to change.